So this is a very, very interesting, two very brief presentations. It's usually, as a moderator, my experience has been very complex. So now it's
to actually moderate.
expand. By the way of occupying all the time that's available. But I think both were both were different. And I'm also supposed to speak. So apart from being a moderator, I'm one of the extremists here. And I've been wondering what to say really, because I had a chat with Marina yesterday about this, and I came in a little earlier, fortunately caught the last 5-10 minutes of the previous panel. And one of the things that I think is a little stretching it a bit, but still is worth putting in front of, or keeping in front of us when we think about these initiatives, but also some of the things that were spoken earlier, is to look at this in relation to what has been happening in the city. And it's not a very easy or a very obvious set of not obvious insights that one has waiting for us when we do that. But yet, I think it's useful to just take 2 steps back and say what has been really the trajectory of the city, and how do we think about initiatives of the kind we've just seen, but also many others that we are familiar with. And these may be bigger movements like the one that emerged to contest the development plan, or even much more local protests and local. They're not movement necessarily. They might be events, in fact, that we know about. It could also be initiatives of this kind which are actually hidden from a lot of us. And I'm thinking of, for instance, this one small library in an informal settlement in Pratapnagar in Jogeshwari, which I stumbled upon once, and which has been there for a couple of decades at least. Now I believe it's gone down. It was moving from space to space in this basti, and it had 5,000 books. It was also recognized by the state government. So we begin to, so a lot of these experiences, so I have actually spent the last few years looking at what has been happening to the city at a kind of macro level. But at the same time, I have also stumbled across a lot of these different initiatives, movements and signs of life, if one can call them, right, in the city, bottom up signs of life near the grassroots. And what I'm going to kind of talk about really is really thinking aloud. So it's not something that I have actually arrived at some kind of a resolution. But on the one hand, what one is seeing with a city like Mumbai, and not just Mumbai, is that a completely new world is being produced right where we are in the last particularly in the last 20-25 years. So there is, one could think of the kind of obvious phenomenon is that the physical space of the city is changing. The geography in terms of connections, networks, infrastructure, that is changing. But we are seeing, we have never seen this kind of occupied skyline where Mumbai was actually, apart from a few 20-25 story towers, it was largely a lot of sky. And you could see it when we were going on various roads. Now the sky is kind of getting blocked in many different ways. Also the look of the city in so many ways is changing. The footprint footprint that the urban poor occupy, and where they occupy it, where they are to be found, that geography is changed. But all of that, in many ways, to my mind, is simply a sign of actually a new world that is being produced. And what I mean by that really is is two things. A, there is of course physical relationships. Who is, for instance, I was just, Marina was urging me to have a second lunch, saying I had come from very far away, which is true, I had come from Devnar, but because of the Eastern Freeway I got here in like 25 minutes. It's something that 6 years ago, till 6 years ago, it was out of question for me to even dream of this kind of proximity. And so, though where I live or where I work has not changed, and neither has Colaba suddenly magically moved closer to where I am, but of course my relationship in terms of how much time it takes for me to go from A to B has transformed, and that is true for most of the geography of Mumbai. So in that sense, my spatial relationships have changed, but also what has changed is the geography of access alongside that. So I am very conscious that I can afford to get into a cab and enjoy this 25-minute ride. That is not necessarily the case for most of Mumbai, who may not even be, most people in Mumbai may not actually be able to afford a casual train ride either. So one is seeing that there is a transformation of the physical space, and there is a transformation of who gets to enjoy the benefits of this. It is accompanied by who pays the costs. And when I talked of how large numbers of urban poor have been moved out from different locations and funneled very, very efficiently and brutally into places like M Ward, which were mentioned earlier, Prachi mentioned, Lalubai Compound and other settlement colonies. Again, there is basically a kind of concentration of, you're creating areas of concentrated disadvantage, which are linked to the creation of areas of concentrated privilege, because it's from those very places that these slum dwellers are moved, and that those places where they were moved from are now much more more efficiently realized centers of privilege. So this kind of transformation that is happening in Mumbai at many levels. I just gave one or two examples. I think the erosion, almost the willful undermining of BSC that one is seeing, or what looks like a willful undermining, is part of the same story. So the question really comes, the question that kind of bothers me is, then what is the nature of this structural kind of change of the city? Who is driving it? What is it being driven towards? If we take these questions as the questions that form the backdrop against which then we start looking at what are people's responses. I think that's when we begin to get a grip on the significance of these responses. And the answers are not simple, and I'm grateful for that, because otherwise we often have a temptation to we come with ready theories for everything, right? Especially if you spend a lot of your time reading, you kind of tend to start thinking that you have read enough, that you understand a lot, right? So, but an initiative like Parcham, for instance, which if you were to talk about it when it was in its nascent stages, you might say, okay, ठीक है, this is good to do in one playground in one corner of Mumbai metropolitan, not even really in Mumbai city. बदल के क्या बदलेगा? Right? It's a small thing. And now suddenly when Salma talks of, they have a team in Bandra or Mahim, right? After I've been, Sabha is a good friend, and we keep hearing of how the team has won many tournaments, and now and I don't think you mentioned that, but all of you guys are now coaches, right? Many of you are coaches. So not only have these young women gone and played, they are now teaching other women, young women, how to play. And actually, more than anything, what this initiative, for instance, is doing is changing the culture at I think that intervention at the level of culture, but not through traditional cultural pathways, but through something so simultaneously mundane and at once revolutionary. I think for me this was very, very interesting, because on the one hand, and I'm familiar with the Pacham story. On the one hand, I find that I might be looking at some of these big changes, okay, and missing certain aspects or certain fronts on which the struggle really is going on, because of, say, thinking about how land is being, how a rent extraction economy around land has taken charge of Mumbai, or how land really is at the center of this whole political economy of transformation, right? But and I might miss these small but very, very significant battles around playground space, which possibly can lead to very, very big breakthroughs. And I suspect that though the people who made life difficult for the group to even find a playground, okay, to begin with, were half aware of the subversive potential of some of these things, because it's, as she said, we don't get to see young women playing football. Simple. Forget football. We don't get to see them moving fast, right, on a playground. Not even that, right? And I think so. I'm fascinated by this question of how to put these examples in front of this larger transformation, and I don't see very, very straightforward relations of just simply celebrating this. We celebrate it, of course, but in terms of where it might go. But fortunately, I also don't quite see any dead ends that stare us in the face. Right? I am actually also very curious about this idea of natural streets for performing arts, because I am somebody who's very interested in performance art, and again, it's one of those things that, left to myself, I would probably never have imagined that one could think of some such initiative. Maybe when we open up for questions and we can elaborate, understand a bit more about the interventions that are being undertaken and the way you are approaching it. But again, I think there is a potential here of intervening through a pathway which is the cultural, and at the lower ends of the cultural hierarchy. You're not talking PM Krishna, right? To intervene at that level, and I don't know where it may go, right? But of course, there are interesting questions of. So all my critical antennae, of course, naturally come up when I hear about culture and the musicians in Paris and London, and I worry on the one hand that we are recreating. Are we in danger of trying to recreate a kind of elite street culture, a kind of elite interpretation of a Western street culture, and thereby not really go in the direction that was potentially there, because we all see in trains and on the railway stations, really poor singers, right? And so I don't know enough about all of this, but these are the questions that came to my mind. So I think this area of who intervenes where and in what and finds the sites for intervention, or the subjects, you might say, on which to intervene, is something which is very, very interesting to think about, especially because otherwise, a lot of the times, the story seems rather tragic, rather dire, right? When you look at the numbers that are involved, when you look at the almost complete powerlessness of ordinary citizens in the face of the way the city affairs are run, the powerlessness of the city itself, given that Indian cities are not really run by Indian cities. Indian cities are run by the state governments who are not elected from the city. So these different initiatives, for me, they really give a lot of hope, and I think it's useful to think about and pay more attention to where people are intervening, on what grounds, with what resources, and with what visions. And I think the exciting part is that most of the time we can't really be sure where it will go. And that is not a problem for me. That really is a great value.